Thanks for the chance to be here today to talk with all of you. How many of you are expecting me to talk about cybersecurity? I'm not going to talk about cybersecurity. Happy to take any questions about cybersecurity later, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. So I had a chance to really sit down and talk about leadership and how do we look at leadership as we go into kind of this next generation in the homeland security space. And one thing that's been nagging me as I look at my career, there's a phrase that I've heard continually, and what's worried me recently is that I've heard this phrase more and more often over the last several years. And the phrase is simply, I don't get involved in the details. How many folks hear that on a regular basis? I don't get involved in the details. And often I hear it in the phrase of like, I don't need to deal with that, I don't want to deal with that, I'm too important to deal with that. And what I would offer is that getting involved in the details is what helps me do my job every single day. And I've given it more thought, I really sat down and I said, well, how did it help me here, how did it help me previously in my career? And what I realized is that we don't spend the time diving into the details of our organizations in ways that are productive and allow us to be more successful. My background, I worked in state government, I worked in local government, worked in the federal government, worked in the private sector. I always use state and local separately because I feel they are two very, very different things. My most hated acronym in the entire world is SLTT, when feds try to group state, local, tribal, territorial together. And they were four very, very different things. So I will talk about state and local as two separate things, two separate perspectives. But I really started to think back about diving into the details and the challenges that each of those types of roles, federal, state, local, private sector, and how diving into the details can be more effective. So I came up with a term, because really the thing is to make up words. Right? If you make up a word, it's always right. So the word I came up with was microvisibility. And the way I think about this is that we always talk a lot about micromanagement. We talk about people, we've all been victims of micromanagement at some point in our careers. And because of that, I think we always try to hold back, and we try not to dive into the details of what's going on, and we give people a lot of space to make their projects, to come up with their solutions. But I would offer that microvisibility, that ability to dive deep into asking questions and understanding information and getting data throughout a process, that deep organizational insight throughout a process allows us to do a number of things I'll talk about, including advocating for your program more effectively, representing your program with seniors, advocating for funding, and a lot of other things. I'll talk about some case scenarios from each of my roles and how I thought it was helpful. Now, this room is looking at me saying, you're an idiot. This is just good management. This is what we all do. And I would offer that all of you are vetted. All of you went through a massive vetting to get here. All of you have gone through the gauntlet of NPS. You've all come out the other side. And arguably, you are all the best leaders and managers in Homeland Security. So I'm not really talking to all of you. This is really about taking a concept and where it's applicable to those individuals that are still learning management, that need additional help and support. Not everybody is a born manager or a born leader, right? There's a lot to be learned. For some people, it comes naturally. For others, it takes more work. So how do we take this as a potential skill and really help people try to adapt it into what they do day in and day out? And what I would offer is that, well, I'm calling microvisibility, call it whatever you want, is really an action with intent. How do we make sure that this isn't just passive? This isn't just about soaking up information. It's not about being a sponge. It's about actively creating processes, systems, networks, capabilities to dive deep into an organization and understand details, data, statistics, facts, stages of progress, and a lot of those types of things. And what I found, at least for me, is that it's gotten more critical the further I've gone in my career, leading up to where I am today. I will also offer that this is even more critical in today's environment of telework, remote work, and a hybrid work environment, where we don't have a lot of that day-to-day connectivity. We don't have as much of that water cooler conversation, that ability to engage with folks on a regular basis. So I do think it is a little bit different from just good management practice that all of you may do day in and day out, but something that we can actively create within our organizations through steps, through conversations, through reports, and details to help get there from here. So when I was in local government, how many local government people do we have? Okay, so for the feds in the room, they were doing the job of 10 feds on any given day. Right? I don't say that disrespectfully, this is kind of a fact, right? The local side, you're wearing multiple hats, you're covering broad programs, you're covering a lot of different topic areas. And often, at least where I was in local government, where I was heavily grant funded, I was getting questions from different federal agencies all the time. and asking about details that, often I found I just had to go back, we're going to check on this, we're going to look at this, we're going to check on this. And what I found is that by creating systems and capabilities to actually get more of that data on a regular basis, to get more of those details on a regular basis, allowed us to convey a level of confidence with our federal partners to really ensure that they're able to continue to support what we're doing. And again, it is slightly different in the sense that it's not just regular good management. It's about creating those systems and processes to have access to those data, to have access to that information every step of the way, to know where projects are along the pathway, to know what stage things are in. And this isn't just project management. This isn't just using whatever latest Microsoft tool or other type of workshop tool you have, but really diving into a level of detail, frankly, that I think people are generally surprised by when you're able to advocate and speak for your programs. When I was at the White House and I found in the private sector where I ran a practice at a consulting firm, the questions come from anywhere and everywhere at the same time. So really utilizing those similar types of tools to make sure that each of your different programs, each of your different areas, have that ability to truly understand what's happening at a level of detail that allow you to speak to the issues. When you travel at the NSC, when you travel on Air Force One, and you travel with others, you pretty much have to speak to a very, very broad range of topics, half of which you know nothing about. But you're the one who's expected to answer any and every question that comes up. And your answer cannot be, I'm going to go find out for you. So one of the things we tried to look at is how do we create, and I know there's a bunch of NSC alumni in here, so hopefully you can vouch for that. But the goal was always, and we never had intentional tools to understand the details that we needed to answer questions that were present. So one of the things we really tried to do was create these systems and capabilities, the questions, the briefings, the papers, to dive deep into each of these respective areas. Some things we dealt with day in, day out, other things that we didn't, so that we can make sure we had strong visibility into those areas to answer those questions as they arose, literally 24/7, anytime that we're there. We needed to have the ability to stay ahead of any question that we were going to be asked, not knowing where the question was coming from, who was going to ask it, or what topic was going to be about. But what we did know is that the answer is, we're going to go look this up for you, was not an acceptable answer. Well, I think you got to say it once. After that, they just don't come back to you again. So how do you make sure that you have that capability? So I want to talk mainly about CISA and what we do, what I have found through my travels into the federal government. I like to jokingly tell people, before I was a Fed, I was a victim of the Feds. But I like to think I brought that state and local perspective into CISA. CISA is a very, very broad organization. So we talk about cybersecurity, we talk about infrastructure security. CISA also does active shooter training. We do bombing prevention. We do render safe with bomb squads all over the country. We're actively involved in domestic violent extremism. We're actively involved in next generation 911 systems to ensure PSAPs can get text to 911, SMS to 911. We're involved in all the GETs and WPS, the wireless priority services that you get, judicial, executive, and legislative branch. We do all of that. We also do cybersecurity for all 16 critical infrastructure sectors and for the entire federal civilian executive branch. So anything that happens outside of the DoD networks and outside the intelligence community networks falls on our backs. We also deal with grants for cybersecurity, grants for next generation 911. We deal with the physical protection of critical infrastructure around the nation across all 16 sectors. We serve as a body that coordinates the 16 sectors and the sector risk management agencies. And we do all of this with 3,000 people. Soon to be 3,000 people. We're working on it. So one of the things I found when I stepped in this role is that's a pretty broad mission space. And the questions that we get are from everywhere and anywhere within the federal government. Whether it's the White House, whether it's the Hill, whether it's our state and local partners, whether it's the media, whether it's no matter who it is coming at us from a million directions with a million questions. And I'm the one who gets to stand up at the podium. And I'm the one in front of the media, I'm the one in front of the Hill that has to be able to speak to every one of these things. So it got me thinking back to the whole question of, I don't get involved in the details. And I told myself I'm going to get involved in the details. And I'm going to create the systems and the capabilities and the reporting for me to be at a level of detail that would make you uncomfortable. But I do it with a promise. I'm going to dive deep to learn details early in a process, but I'm not going to tell you what to do with it. I'm not going to interfere when I think you're going astray. I'm not going to interfere when I think this is about to crash, I'll let you crash a little bit. Not crash a lot, but crash a little bit. And be able to speak to and advocate for our programs effectively as in any form that we need to in order to be responsive. We do a lot, I spend a lot of time focusing on information sharing. This is something that I'm extremely passionate about. I think, frankly, the federal government has not done an effective job. We're in a safe space, so I'm allowed to say negative things, right? On information sharing. I have a mantra on information sharing. How do we get the right information to the right people in a timely manner that results in more informed decision making? If the information we're trying to share does not drive decision making by somebody else, why are we sharing? It's not helpful. And it stems from a simple question I got when I was a hospital administrator. One of the federal agencies, of which has employees in this room I shall not name, called me and said, "Are you evacuating your hospital? There's a hurricane coming." I said, "No." He says, "How dare you do that? I can tell you there's a 42% probability of moderate flooding at your hospital if you don't evacuate. And I have a model here from a national lab based on 100 years of meteorological data that says you're going to flood." I said, "That's cool." I looked out my window. I stuck my finger in the air. I turned on the Weather Channel. I said, "I'm not going to evacuate." But you're going to question me based on information that you have that's not in my hands and expect me to drive my decision making based on information I don't readily have? So how do we look at information sharing? How do we strengthen our information sharing? The only way to do that is to know what your agency has. And as your agencies get larger, as you step into a lot of these new roles, unless you're doing those deep dives, this is government. We know a lot of it is business as usual. So if you're going to upset the apple cart, if you're going to change the way things are working, if you're truly going to make some of these transformational changes we often hear about, we need to dive into these details. We need to dive into the details and force that change to happen. We need to understand what risk we're accepting. I'm a firm believer. My organization spends a lot of time talking about risk. We spend a lot of time talking about risk identification. And there's all sorts of methodologies and all this kind of stuff for risk identification. We spend a lot of time talking about risk mitigation and all the things we're going to do to mitigate risk. We take risk every day. I walked up some stairs. There was a risk. I made it up here. Jury's still out of what happens when I leave, okay? We forget the third leg of the stool. The third leg of the stool is risk acceptance. If we have identified a risk and we have not mitigated it, we have accepted it. Now, we accept risk all the time, but do we openly and knowingly accept that risk? How do we accept risk for our organizations if we're not diving deep enough to understand truly what's happening and truly what decisions are being made, how those decisions are being made, and what risk I'm accepting on behalf of my agency? We can't. So this is another area that I found by kind of implementing processes and procedures to dive to that quasi-uncomfortable space in investigations and inquiries into organizations that helps us drive those types of arguments. It helps me address systemic and organizational issues. Not a surprise to anyone, the federal government is not a perfectly well-oiled machine. We always have things that we can improve. We have systems, processes, measures, metrics. There's things happening in our organizations that we may not always see. And what I would offer is that having the ability to do these deeper dives truly allows us to understand and to address some of these systemic organizations and issues that, frankly, I never would have seen if we didn't take these steps to overtly go out there and do this. And we do this type of stuff every day, right? A lot of it happens by happenstance. When I was in another federal agency, I ran logistics centers all over the country. I went to a warehouse once out here in California. And I saw this guy running back and forth between the racks and a room. The racks in a room, racks in a room. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm doing inventory, sir." "This is how you do inventory?" He goes, "Yeah, the computer's in there. The stuff's out here." So I look at the number, I run in the room, I type it in. I run back, look at the next number. I run in the room. This is stupid. Why are we doing it this way? Well, a computer costs $3,000, and we're going to spend the money on it. So, well, that's dumb. We're going to buy you a computer. And to me, that was one of those things that I just happened to be there at the right time. I happened to see this person running back and forth. I happened to call it the question. I happened to be able to solve it. Otherwise, frankly, I'm convinced that to this day, 13 years later, that person will still be running back and forth between the racks. A lot of small things like that is what got me to think about how do we change things from passive understanding and passive visibility to active. How do we put, again, those measures in place to actively see what's happening? So what we did after that is we ensured that we had our IT team go out to every single facility and watch them for 48 hours. Look at how we're doing work, look at how things are working, look at our processes and our procedures, and we identified about a dozen other ways, a dozen stupid things like that were happening that could be fixed by actively taking steps to engage. And again, not passively waiting for these things to happen, but to actively be able to step in and take action. I found this also allows me to tailor my arguments more effectively. When I'm engaging with the Hill, when I'm engaging with OMB, when I'm engaging with the secretary or anyone in the organization, to be able to speak at a level of detail that allows us to build better arguments. One of the things that we don't do, I think, is spend enough time looking at how do we help strengthen our senior leaders' ability to make stronger arguments, and not just in each briefing, but in a steady state. And I know that sounds a little nuanced or a little crazy, but often I'll get briefings before every meeting I go to. I get a beautiful memo, it's nice, sometimes there's slides, sometimes there's pictures, right? And it's one thing to get briefed per meeting or per topic you're going to talk about, but to truly understand the wave of what's happening in your organization, to be able to speak to a level of detail requires regular and consistent information sharing at a level of detail that allows you to speak with a good amount of consistency. I get asked about hiring all the time. Something that the Hill's interested in, the OMB's interested in, Deputy Secretary is interested in. Who else asked me about it? Anyway, every week I'm talking about hiring. And so one of the things we want to do is create a mechanism to allow us to not just be reactive to our inquiries, but for us to monitor at depth what is happening in hiring in our organization. So we have the ability to speak to where people are in the hiring process, where people are just in numbers, data, statistics, in a way that allows us to advocate for our actions more effectively and in a more timely manner. And not, again, be reactive to incomings, but to be able to go out there and anytime information is needed, to be able to have that currency of information we need to speak intelligently to the issue. And again, I know this sounds kind of nuanced because you're probably thinking, again, with this audience, we do this every day. This is what I do because I'm a good leader and I'm a good manager. But I would offer, as you look throughout your organizations, there are people who are looking more passively at information collection and dissemination than those that are looking actively at how do I maintain that level of visibility. It's a fine line between micromanagement and what I call microvisibility. And I've at least I've found that for me, as I've kind of come through different organizations, as I've stepped into this role here especially, that it's really been critical to my ability to advocate for our program, to prevent unnecessary incoming inquiries from answering questions with, I'm not sure, we'll get back to you. And it's allowed us to ensure that we are instilling a higher level of confidence with our partners when there are areas of skepticism in what's coming our way. So this is something I've been thinking about, something I want to throw out to this group. Maybe it's the last thing I ever talk about because you guys rip me apart. But it's something that I think is a slightly different approach to doing business than we traditionally have in the past. And something that with intent, with active action, that we can create that additional level of visibility to allow us to speak to our programs more effectively in ways that I just don't think the approach we've traditionally done through passive engagement allows to happen. So that's my theory and my concept. You guys tell me if it's, what do you think?